I chair the School Curriculum Assessment and Accountability Council meeting, affectionately known as SCAAC. Today is July 19th, 2022. We're so glad you all are joining us. And we are going to kick off this meeting by me introducing Melissa Chandler, who is the new program consultant with the Kentucky Department of Education. She is going to take care of some logistics and the roll call.
Perfect. Thank you, Jana Beth. And hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here. I've communicated with several of you all via email, and I'm sure we'll have lots more communication in the future. So I'll go ahead and call roll and make sure that everyone knows our SCAAC members. When I do call your name, if you would, please just make sure that your camera is on, state your full name, and then indicate that you are present. So I have Artavia Acklin. I think I saw her here, so I'll give her just a minute. Maybe I'll come right back. Okay, what about Heather Aldridge? Deborah Atherton?
Deborah Atherton, present.
Houston Barber, if I'm correct, I believe that Houston is not going to be with us on SCAAC anymore, correct? Okay. Renee Boss.
Hi, Renee Boss, I'm present.
Thank you. Martha Emmons.
Hi, Martha Emmons, I'm here.
Thank you. Chuck Fletcher.
Chuck Fletcher is here, but I'm not sure if my camera is working. Can y'all see me?
I can't see you. Ben, do you think that's something on our end?
Yeah, because it's working here. I'm not having any problems. So just be aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have him enabled. Chuck, you may have to leave the meeting and come back sometimes. That happens. But we do have your permissions set up where you have camera ability.
Okay, I'll go off and come back on. Thanks.
Alrighty.
Thank you. Jana Beth Francis.
Good morning, Jana Beth Francis, present.
Leslie Jeffries. Lisa Keir. Brenda McCown.
Brenda McGowan here.
Kristen Putnam.
Kristen Putnam here.
Allison Tammy. And I believe she was not going to be with us today. Jenny Uri.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning. Henry Webb. And Jason Reeves. Okay. And we do have a quorum, Jana Beth.
Well, excellent. I'm glad we have a quorum.
Yeah, and before I turn it back over to you to go through the rest of our agenda, just a couple reminders about conducting virtual meetings. This meeting must comply with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. So SCAAC members should ensure that their video is on and that they can be seen throughout the duration of the meeting. Committee members, please mute your microphone when not talking. However, all the discussions will be broadcast to the public, so be sure that your microphone is not on mute when you speak. And every time you speak during the meeting, please unmute your mic, state your name, and then take a short pause. And that way we'll be able to recognize who's talking. And then please silence or turn off any other electronic devices that could cause disruption to your sound feed. I will be taking minutes, and those will be shared with the general public on the KDE website when they're available. And I think that's all the housekeeping things. Jana Beth, I'll turn it back over to you.
I think the only last thing to mention is we don't have the chat enabled today because it is a public meeting and you have to be able to access everything. So you're just going to have to unmute if you have a question and participate. So I think that's a good thing. So again, everyone, welcome, and we're going to get started. The first item on our agenda is a review and approval of our minutes from our March meeting. This was sent to you earlier in your folder. So I hope you had a chance to review those. If so, I would entertain a motion for approval.
Debbie Atherton. Motion to approve.
Christy Putnam, second.
Okay, with a motion from Debbie and a second from Christy, we have that motion on the floor. Melissa, do you want to do a roll call for voting? Or how do you want us to proceed?
Yeah. And just housekeeping, because this is my first time. How do you all typically do that? Do you allow a show of hands or all cameras on and I? Or yes or no?
Let's do all cameras on and I for this one because I think it's a pretty standard. So
Absolutely.
we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the March meeting. Raise your hand and say aye if you're in agreement. Aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, the minutes have passed. So we are ready to get started with the bulk of the meeting. And we have Crystal Rowland and Thomas Klaus from the to talk to us about standards, the review and timeline on science, I believe.
Good morning. Thank you, Jenna. I'm Crystal Rowland, the Director of the Division of Program Standards, and I have with me this morning Thomas Klaus, Branch Manager of the Academic Core Branch in the Office of Teaching and Learning, and we'll be providing an update on the standards review process. As we share today, we would love to hear your thoughts on how we can support science and visual and performing arts standards implementation once those standards are finalized, as well as ideas of how we can improve quorum on our advisory panels and review committee, which are charged with the work of the standards review. KRS 1586453 calls for the KDE to implement a process for reviewing all academic standards and aligned assessments beginning in the 2017-2018 school year. The schedule calls for 1 or 2 content areas to be reviewed each year and every 6 years thereafter on a rotating basis. So at this time, Thomas is going to provide us an update with where we are in the review of our science standards and our visual and performing arts standards.
Thanks, Crystal. Good morning, everybody. So just an overview. So the process for the Kentucky Academic Standards for Science Review and Revision started in the fall of 2020. At that time, an application was put out for advisory panel and review committee members. As Crystal mentioned the statute, in that statute, there are 3 advisory panels that are formed, one at the elementary, one at the middle, and one at the high school level, as well as a review committee. Those groups are made up of educators from within the content area, representatives from higher education institutions in the state, and business and community members. Those are the committees that will respond to feedback and produce the draft academic standards document. One important thing to note, and related to one of our guiding questions, is that in order for the KDE to have a meeting and facilitate the process, we need to have a quorum of those committees present. So after that application went out, the public comment survey went out via a third party about the current Kentucky Academic Standards for Science to get feedback from education stakeholders. And then we brought the AP and RC in April to set a vision for that work. From last summer until this summer, the AP and RC reviewed public feedback and then reviewed public feedback, and after responding to all public feedback, a draft Kentucky Academic Standards for Science was drafted, and that has gone out for public comment now. So there's a survey out that is done by the American Institutes for Research, as well as focus groups. And the point of that survey and those focus groups is to ensure that we have education stakeholder feedback on the process and the standards document. Once the survey closes, we'll look to bring the AP and RC groups back in August to have them respond to the public feedback from the survey as well as the focus groups. After that process, there will be time to present to interim joint and the standards and assessment process review committee. And the point of those 2 meetings is, 1, to ensure that the process laid out in statute has been followed, and that education stakeholders from across the state have had the opportunity to provide feedback. After that, tentatively, we're scheduled to present to the Board of Education the draft document, draft academic standards for science, in the fall. Visual and performing arts, that standards revision process is a little bit more in its infancy. So that began in the December of 2021 with the public comment feedback survey going out. In the spring, applications were sent out for their advisory panel and review committees, and those members were selected in April. One thing to note for all of these, one of the things for the AP and RC is to ensure that there's geographic coverage. And then with VPA, one of the big pushes was to ensure that we had representation across the different VPA disciplines, whether that's music, ballet, visual arts. Wanted to make sure we had education stakeholders from across those disciplines. That vision setting for the process began in June, and since then we have been meeting with the different APs, elementary, middle, elementary and high school, and then middle tomorrow, to start going through the public feedback and then just ensuring that they are comfortable in the process. So that's just a little bit about where we are on the Kentucky Academic Standards for Science and the Kentucky Academic Standards for the Visual and Performing Arts. And I'm going to turn it back over to Crystal to walk us through the Kentucky Standards Review timeline.
Thank you, Thomas. So the standards review timeline was recently updated to extend to the end of the 2027 school year. It's available on the KDE website at this time. Several standards documents were approved in 2019, meaning that they will be up for review in 2025. And so we have scheduled tentative review dates that will allow us to spread this work out and stay within statutory requirements. Hopefully this will alleviate a flood of new standards documents being approved at the same time. So there are efforts being made in that area. So at this time, we'd like to come back to our guiding questions and get your ideas and thinking around how might the KDE support the field in the science and VPA standards once those are released and approved, and what recommendations you might have for improving quorum for advisory panel and our review committees.
Thank you, Crystal and Thomas. So right now, let's start with the very first question. So it looks like both science and VPA will be approved this fall. What can KDE do to support those of us out in the field in the implementation of these revised standards? So we can't use the chat, but you can raise your hand and we'll be able to call on people. You may also, we're a small enough group today, just unmute and jump in there. I'll kick us off by saying I'm sure you're going to do a crosswalk document because that's what everybody will always ask for. Is there a crosswalk document that shows us how we moved from the previous set of standards to the new standards?
I was going to add to that, is there a way to have cohorts or cadres of teachers across the state? I know that, you know, when the Common Core came out for, well, I know we don't call it the Common Core, but back in the day for math and ELA, the content leadership networks, that was effective, I believe, for math and ELA. So I don't know if it would be the same design, but some kind of way to empower teachers to feel like they have ownership in the process.
Thank you, Renee.
Yes.
So I would encourage you to have a division, like Renee said, that's focusing on teachers, but also a division to work with instructional coaches and principals on, are we seeing the pedagogical shifts that the new standards call for? So it's almost like doing a track for the principals and instructional coaches where they're able to walk into classrooms and be able to identify, are we providing standards-based work to these students? Have we made the necessary changes needed for the instructional shifts that were called on? I feel like when we look across the state, we're still learning how to teach science the way the standards want us to. So any resources you can give would be great.
Thank you for those recommendations.
I think a checklist for administrators, what Jana Beth just said, maybe a checklist for administrators as they move through their building, as they look in a classroom, what should I be seeing in here?
Yes.
Thank you, Deborah. Okay, as always, with any of our guiding questions, we don't end here, but I think we've kind of talked this first one through. You have access to Thomas and Crystal. If you have an idea after we get off this meeting today, always reach out to them. And you actually will see you have that in your email. But let's go back and look at the second guiding question. And that is, what recommendations do you have for improving the quorum for the advisory panel and review committee? Can I start by asking a couple clarifying questions? So are your meetings during the normal workday?
Yes.
Thomas, I'll
Yes.
pass this one on to
So
you.
to this point, science has been during the normal workday and summer. So there was an opportunity, and the opportunity was presented for evenings and even weekends. But that was that didn't get much sway. I'll say that. But yes, normally during the day.
And okay, Martha, you're muted, so make sure you unmute.
When people agree to be on this committee, are they given the parameters that if they miss more than one without an excuse, they are relieved of those duties and someone else will be appointed in their place?
At this time, that is not something that has taken place. More so, I think the impetus has been on the need to be part of quorum. Now, we do up front let them know about the time requirement and the time commitment and the amount of meetings, but no, there hasn't been to this point and any language about if you miss, you're out.
I understand that seems a little draconian, and yet at the same time, having served on many committees for many, many years, I do find that for most of us, if we know we have only 2 times to miss without a really valid excuse, it causes us to think twice about it, and it assigns more importance to our individual attendance, in my opinion.
Thank you.
I agree with Martha, but I would also add, I'm assuming these committees are that nobody is compensated, because that's typically the case, right? But is there a different way to make it enticing? So I do think in the last few years, things have really changed for teachers in particular, well, for principals too, from what I'm hearing from my principals. But is there a way to if it can't be monetary compensation, is there a way to make it more enticing and worth the time, because everybody's stretched so thin? It might be that, when it comes down to doing this or doing that, that people just decide that it's less important now. And I've served on committees, and I'm happy to give them my time because I like to learn, but at the same time, you're asking for ideas, and if getting quorum is a problem, I just wonder if there's a way to make it more enticing beyond just service.
Brenda?
Yeah. Are the committee members strictly volunteers, or are they appointed, are they nominated by the various organizations, educational organizations?
So the application is sent out statewide, and so from that application, we look for geographic representation, and we look for varying levels of experience within the different content area. So mostly the committees are made up of educators in the state, and then the business community members and representatives from higher education. The representatives from higher education and business and community members, they don't have to put an application in. They're appointed through different means, but the teachers are all through that application process.
Thank you. I wondered if they were strictly volunteers, or if there was a need for an association or an organization to say, hey,
you need to get to these meetings. So they're strictly volunteers.
Would again say that maybe because I remember these 20 plus years ago and I've been a DAC way too long, but I think a key is whenever I see the invitation, I try to send it out as assistant superintendent. I emphasize the wonderful professional learning opportunity, and I support my teachers if they are attending and it's a professional learning because that's what I see this as, a professional learning opportunity to dive deeper into whatever standards are being reviewed. We will pay them a stipend if it's out of their normal workday. And so to me, I think one step that's important is to make sure that the leaders of the districts understand the importance of having a teacher on this committee. And I've always taken that as something we want to make sure we have people involved. Now, the school year stuff, every district is struggling with substitutes. And so, you know, it's going to be a hard press when you're going to be sitting in the school building on an online meeting and we have kids without a teacher. So that's also a challenge. But again, if the district's on board, we would send out somebody from our team to cover that class so that teacher could learn. And so as much as possible, I think we need to make sure there's a strong connection to the professional learning that actually goes on by being on one of these committees.
Beth, that's what I was talking about making it more enticing. So thank you for sharing what you do for your teachers in your district.
Yes, we appreciate those ideas and the thinking around what we can do. Functioning in a post-COVID world, we have flexibility in meeting in person, being hybrid or being virtual. And so we are being very thoughtful about opportunities when we can be virtual and allow people flexibility to not be away from their buildings longer than they need to be, but then also being mindful of opportunities when coming together in person might be best, because those are those opportunities for those professional growth conversations to happen organically when people come together around this type of work.
Yes, go ahead, please, Martha.
How many meetings are we talking about and how often? Something that I didn't pick up at the beginning and now I realize would be helpful to know.
Thomas, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so generally, you know, for VPA, we put out that, you know, we're anywhere from 10 to 15 meetings. Same thing for science. You know, I think one of the things that we couldn't control for in science is some of those effects and impacts of COVID. But generally, it's when the press releases go out for the application, it's 10 to 15 meetings.
Per year or per what?
Per year.
We're talking more than one meeting a month as a rule.
And we try to shoot over, but sometimes it's not all APs meeting. Sometimes it's the elementary AP meeting. Sometimes it's the middle. Sometimes they're all collected together. So yeah, we shoot to have 10 to 15 meetings a year, but that might not be everybody.
Yeah. Okay, because that is a lot.
You may think of giving teachers a badge to put on their email. I know badging works, but you know, it would be great to say I'm a member of KDE's advisory panel on science. That way, when they're emailing with their colleagues, someone might say, what's this about? So upon completing it, they could say I served on, and they could keep that badge until the next advisory panel for that content area. And that might entice some teachers. Anything else for Crystal or Thomas? So I have one quick question. Thank you so much. First of all, it's a thanks. We asked for the timeline to be updated at the last March meeting, and we appreciate that. So when we look at this timeline, I just want to point out, I think you all realize this, reviewing reading and math and backing right into reading, writing, and math all together is a big financial lift if schools are looking at new instructional materials. So I like that you're trying to spread them out as much as possible. And so I really appreciate that. In the best case scenario, from the time reading and writing starts in spring of 2025, how many years until we see them approved and ready for implementation in the school?
Well, typically, the process to get them approved takes about 6 to 9 months, and that's after the completion process of going through and eliciting feedback. Those are 2 30-day comment periods, and then the work time in between. So, we want to ensure that the advisory panels have the time to address feedback and make any revisions that they may see necessary. So in total, it's typically a 2-year process for those things to transpire.
And I know Jennifer and Rhonda are on here, but so after everything gets through and you get to classroom implementation, it's a year before we see a change in the assessment. Is that correct?
Yes, Janabeth, it's at least a year. Sometimes it may take 2, because you have to have that development phase where you bring teachers in, you begin to do the development, you work with a vendor on that, and then you need a field test as well. So talked about it. It's certainly, I think the bill even calls for a 2-year period before you're assessing. So I'll let Jennifer weigh in because we just.
Sure.
You may have.
Yes, and it also depends on the timing of the regulation that goes through for approval of the standards in the process. So if it works out that we can develop items based on those, and how quickly we can field test items as well as make them operational. So it's a matter of timing as well.
Okay, I think, we're in this period of where schools have ESSER funds still that they're using, the recoveries funds. I think by the time we get to the math and reading and revisal of standards, we're going to be back to pulling our pennies together to get new instructional resources. And so as much as possible, when Katie has an opportunity, I think school leaders and teachers need to understand the timeline so they can start doing some forward thinking on their plans so that they can afford and plan for new standards and possibly new instructional materials, especially now that the districts are working with site-based councils on instructional material review. So that's why I had those follow-up questions. Anybody else from the committee have a question for Crystal or Thomas? Well, we so appreciate your all's work and thank you for coming on. And when will the next invitation to be out on committees come out?
Thomas, do you know when to expect the next one?
I think if we go back out, I think we can see that timeline.
Yes.
I think it's this fall, right? Dun, 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 dun. Oh, next one. OPE.
Yeah, it looks like reading
Yes.
and writing in 2024-25 school year.
Wonderful. We'll keep an eye out. If you're still around, you might have hung up your chalkboard by then, but hopefully you haven't.
Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank
you all. Again, a reminder, you can always reach out to anybody you hear present. Our next one is an example of our ever-changing school environment, and we have Marty Park, Ben Maynard, and Mickey Ray here to talk to us about the updates on full-time enrollment with online, virtual, and remote learning. I don't know who's going to start, Mickey or Marty. This is a great joint committee work I see. So hats off for collaboration.
Awesome, and thank you for recognizing that. Hi, I'm Marty Park. I am our Chief Digital Officer at the Kentucky Department of Education. And you're exactly right. This has been an amazing body of collaborative work, and we'll reference that throughout this discussion. I think the last time I was with this committee when we pushed forward our academic standards for technology, and previously our academic standards for library media, and also our Kentucky academic standards for computer science. And so it's always a great opportunity to get into a discussion with this committee and receive feedback so that we can move the work forward the best that we can. So thank you again. This is a very timely opportunity for Kentucky, and this is, and I just wanted to give a brief kind of overview. We will not go through every single slide that is in the materials. That's really mostly for you to review and to kind of build some additional thinking around, hopefully to prompt some questions, and maybe to review later as this discussion moves forward. And so specifically the conversation, and we want to level set first. The conversation is around full-time enrolled students. Okay, so we know that throughout the state, 92 to 93% of our school districts offer what we refer to as supplemental coursework for students. So this is course acceleration in some cases, where students will pick up a course that's maybe that's offered online and virtual, that is maybe not offered in their district, and that's supplemental work. That's not what we're talking about here. This is a conversation strictly around full-time enrolled students. And so that's a good level set for us. It's also a conversation that is around 2%, maybe 3% of students statewide who, for all the right reasons, need a different opportunity. In some cases, it's for students who need additional supports, that the in-person experience is not the right experience for them right now. And so it's an opportunity for us to kind of make sure that we're getting some things right. What you'll hear us say today a lot is high quality. So what we're driving towards are high quality programs. And that's a hope. But it's also a promise, and that's something that we want to be held accountable to, that any step forward, any move forward that we make for full-time enrolled online, virtual, and remote students is wrapped around high-quality measures and high-quality experiences. So the guiding questions that and there's a ton, but just to choose three is, I think it's really important for us to understand where do online, virtual, and remote learning experiences connect to our KBE and KDE's mission and goals. That's important for us because we do believe in our mission and goals, and we want to make sure they're fully aligned. And so that's work that we've obviously engaged in and made sure to align with. Another guiding question is what role do we play in supporting you, supporting districts to create high quality learning experiences? And again, we'll say the words high quality a ton today, and that's what's wrapped really to the core of this work. And where can we provide more clarity, especially to expand opportunities, to value the differences that not only each district has, but also each student has. There's an opportunity for us to develop and to assist and help drive clarity for students who need these additional opportunities, to eliminate barriers and to create room for you to work within your local context to so that the future, the possibility that you see for your students is available. And then finally, how can more clearly defining, and then obviously us pursuing this work, clearly defining high quality learning experiences help you determine the strengths and the areas for growth within your program offerings, and that's really important to us. We think we can help. We've got some work that we'll share and some additional funding that is going towards that work to help you determine your strengths and areas of growth. And again, just to nod towards the collaborative work, we have collaboratively worked. This is like it's been a whole KDE effort on this topic because we want to get it right. We want to do our best work, but we need voices from everybody in order to make that happen. And I'll say that working in lockstep with Mickey on this work is great.
Thank you, Marty. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be with you today. And as Marty was saying, this slide, it really serves to highlight the connection of this work to our desire and the goal of United We Learn to create vibrant student experiences. And in this case, there is that focus on innovation. And so that's why it's so important that we engage both internal and external partners around this opportunity to ensure that students can be successful who will be volunteering and choosing to participate in this more non-traditional learning environment.
And for us, it's been extremely important to understand where we've been. So we've pulled a timeline approach together that we think is really, it's just vital to understand because in hearing a lot of and working with a lot of stakeholders to get additional ideas, there are some we've been in some places that folks would suggest that would be great, and we've studied other states, and so it's important. So in 2000, we were one of the very first states to launch a virtual high school, and it was a really positive experience for a long period of time. But just to nod towards it, it's not the right place for us right now. In studying some other states, we believe that other states are moving in a new direction there as well. And so we wanted to provide this timeline to you just to kind of understand where we've been and where we're going. It's important that with the Kentucky Virtual High School model, there are certainly, a large percentage, 98% of students were part-time. And so it was, again, it was supplemental course pickup here or there. And so there wasn't really a full-time enrollment opportunity for a small percentage of students, but this small percentage of students is extremely important. We all would agree to that. And so there are major design work and in around 2012, the Kentucky Virtual High School transition, and so was retired effectively. But transition, so we at the Kentucky Department of Education transitioned from a delivery model approach to really a model where we were supporting schools and districts in local development, and that's the path that we want to continue to head down. We believe it's the right path for you, and we believe it's the right path for your students, and so that brings us to with the pandemic effect of needing to offer an experience, and for a percentage of your students who did not feel comfortable or safe coming to school for a period of time. So the attendance waiver, the pupil attendance waiver, was designed at superintendent request. And so last school year was year one of that waiver. Our Kentucky Board of Education approved year two of that waiver. In the design of that work, we knew all along that was a temporary approach, but it was a great opportunity for us to not only collaborate and work to get that waiver right, but to develop those high quality measures to ensure that students were having a high quality experience. But I do want to call out and point out that the pandemic version of emergency remote learning is not what we're talking about. So while that was important for us at that period of time, as we move forward, we are talking about instructional design wrapped around high quality. This is not emergency response work. This is the right content, the right structure for the right student at the right time. We have tons of examples, as do you, where students need to work through a period of time while not coming on campus, and this is the experience that they need, whether that's mental health reasons, whether that's social emotional learning reasons, for whatever, maybe that's physical. health reasons that historically we would think about from a home hospital perspective. But there's a percentage of our students, we believe around 2%, as I said before, that need an experience for a period of time where they don't come on campus. And we believe that our public schools can offer the best experience possible. And that's exciting for us as we move forward to the bullseye, which is next. And what's next is that our Kentucky Board of Education will be hearing a new regulatory language in August, and we'll share that at the very end. We'll share what some of that can mean. And so just a capture for you. I won't read this entire thing. This is one slide with a lot of words on it. But just to point out that, again, this is full-time enrollment. This is not part-time. That's what we're focused on right now. Certainly some design, some technologies, some tools. There's work that crosses over, obviously. We all know that. But in terms of structure and in terms of opportunity for students, when we think about full-time enrollment, that means something else. That means that we're providing the right supports from a school and district level, but also that the student has the right supports off campus, the right supports at home. And so there's criteria that each and every school district who would participate and design on needs to take into account. The pupil attendance waiver, we refer to, that's in most superintendents refer to that as seat time attendance versus virtual performance based. And so what we're working on right now, the proposed regulation language that our Kentucky Board of Ed will hear is the attendance approach, the seat time. So pupil attendance work, virtual performance based. So performance based structures are still there. That's still an opportunity for grades 5 through 12. We know that for some districts, that's not the right approach. That's a pass-fail approach, and the funding mechanics that are tied to that are much different. And so we're not talking about virtual performance-based in this work. We're talking about the attendance-based structures, which we believe are a great opportunity, as given feedback by our school districts already, to wrap additional high-quality components around. So it's a more strategic approach to the designs of a full-time enrolled online virtual and remote learning program. And so there's some additional points that are available to you that I'm going to scoot through. I know the agenda's full, so I'm trying to. We could talk about this work all day. I will warn you that if you step back a little bit from this visual, you kind of see Chester Cheeto or Simba from The Lion King. So be aware that was not the desire here. But Mickey, I know that you wanted to share some of the connection and collaboration.
Sure, and that's a beautiful illusion. But what I'm hoping you'll see is that learning is actually at the heart of this visual. So you can see here, it touches nearly every office within the agency, and that requires collaboration. And so OET is represented here today, of course, the Office of Teaching and Learning, but this impacts all of us as well as schools and districts. And so that's where we want to keep the focus on the student experience and on the learning that we would want in terms of high quality instruction for those students.
Thank you, Mickey. And again, that visual is there for you to kind of study, to see how we're all fitting together and working together on this work. We've definitely studied across the nation to try to understand what other states are doing and where other states are going. Is important for us to kind of see what is taking shape for us and what we believe the right move is. And so we've kind of given a crosswalk of our neighbors to look and see what our surrounding states are doing. There is a blank for Kentucky in an area for multi-district fully online programs. There's new emerging work that's being done there. And that's where we're watching that. That's certainly a possibility and an option. We know that districts can combine and work together to serve a larger group of students that span across different districts, and we think that's super smart and an option. We know that some education cooperatives are also interested in that work, and so we'll see how that plays out. But you can kind of see where Kentucky is alongside some of our neighbors, and that may be helpful for you to think about where we want to be. And again, we're talking about a super important but relatively small percentage of our students statewide, because obviously it's worth stating, we all believe that in-person learning is where we want to be with 98% of our students. That's not in question. That's not a part of really the conversation. It's about our students who families have are working towards reason, they have reasons why their student being in person is not the right thing for them right now. And so the opportunity to serve them with the high quality of learning experiences that our public school districts offer, we all believe that that's top notch and top shelf. So just some data points that we wanted to just make you aware of as you're thinking and as you're working towards maybe you're working towards design work inside of your school district. So the waiver that, again, the year one was last school year, year two is this upcoming school year. So the 22-23 school year is the second and final year of the temporary waiver. And so we working towards a more permanent solution. So in the 21-22 school year, we had 144 districts submit and receive approval. That's a large number. And we expected it to be somewhere around 100, 120, but 144 districts went ahead and submitted for approval in the event that they needed that. We did a mid-year survey because, data is very important to us to wrap the story around what's actually the student experience, what is actually going on. So the story with multiple data elements becomes very important to us. And so a mid-year survey produced, 104 districts responded. Of those 104, as expected, 84 were actually using the waiver. So again, 20 reported that they filed or submitted for the waiver application, but did not actually use it. As they worked towards design, they realized that they could get, they didn't really need it at that point. And so that was important to us. As we move forward, 96% reported that the waiver helped them retain or re-enroll homeschool students. So that's very important, and I would pause there just to ask you to think about that for a second. So we believe the service that we provide and the product that we put in place for the student experience is awesome, and we want our students with our public schools. And for 96% of the 104 districts who responded to report that it helped them retain or re-enroll students that's very important to us. 85% of districts reported transitioning individual students back to in-person due to a lack of progress or growth at the expected rate that they had for those students. And that's a shout out to the Kentucky Digital Learning Guidelines. If you haven't checked those out, we'll share that resource as well. We have this bolded because it's personally, this is very important and exciting. You could read this and maybe take a little different spin on it. But the fact is that these are not programs that students sit behind a sheet of glass and learning happens, right? So there has to be engagement, there has to be participation, there has to be checks or monitoring for progress. We know that a strong online, virtual, and remote learning experience has teacher interaction to it. You'll see all that come to life as we move forward in these program standards. But for 85% of districts to individually and from a personalized, customized experience approach, work with an individual student or family and say, this isn't really working. We could catch it early. There shouldn't be weeks and weeks of students not making progress, right? That wouldn't happen in person, and we don't expect that to happen in a full-time enrolled online, virtual, and remote experience. And so the opportunity for teachers and schools to say, hey, this isn't working for you, let's get you back in person, so that you can stay on track. 85% of our districts reported that. That's awesome. We're super excited about that. That's a big deal. And so again, just to push on, these are elements of high quality. That's just one element of high quality. The final thing I'll share from a data perspective is that we currently have about 45 or so districts who have submitted for this second year of waiver. We expected it to be much lower, and that's ringing true so far. So we're just a few weeks. Sorry, I know I shouldn't say this, but we're just a few weeks from starting school again, but only 45 districts have submitted or so. We expect 55, maybe to 60. That's where we think we'll be. That's where we think we'll be for the waiver for next year. And these are districts who have a need and it's working well for them. And the districts who made it work for a while in an emergency approach have shifted and transitioned back to getting families and students back in person, and that's awesome. So again, it's a transition away from the emergency response work to the full-time design, the experience design that we're after. So that's really good for us. We won't read these quotes, but understanding student voice is extremely important. We all know that. Parent voice and student voice becomes really important in this work. One of the things that you'll see is that this is not involuntary placement of students. That what you'll see in the proposed regulatory language, that this is voluntary only. So a parent, a family, a caregiver would request that a student be enrolled in the full-time experience. This is not involuntary placement based on discipline action or anything like that. And so again, understanding students and for the right student, that this is a better fit. That's what this work is after. And I know that's what, if your district is actively engaged or considering or has an awesome experience that you're providing students, that's what you're focused on as well. So some of the components that you'll see in the regulatory language, and I know, Mickey, we wanted to touch on just a few. There are some, we're really happy with where the new regulation is drafted so far. We can't share it yet because the draft is not yet available, much like Dr. Foster shared earlier with some of the documents, but very soon you'll be able to see some of these high quality elements that are extremely important. Mickey, I wondered if you could share some of these.
And if we can go back just to that previous slide, I do want to hit on number 8 there. And so you will see this continuing from the waiver into the regulation. So we are wanting to ensure that there is alignment to the Kentucky academic standards, as you would expect. We are wanting to challenge schools and districts to really think about what that standards alignment can look like in the selection of instructional resources that will be utilized in a full-time virtual learning environment. And when thinking about MTSS and meeting the needs of the whole child, where are they engaging with the teacher, with other students, and how will they receive more targeted support? So at tier 2 and tier 3, if that becomes a need based on the progress monitoring that would naturally happen and the formative assessment models that would be occurring within a virtual learning environment. And then looking at this next slide, I would like to focus on it. Marty, please feel free to add anything else. But also, I kind of touched on that progress monitoring piece. You'll see that reflected in number 9. But if you look also at number 11, we feel it's very important as well for teachers, for building administrators, coaches, anyone who will be participating in that virtual learning environment, delivering instruction, but also supporting that teacher to be equipped with high quality professional learning that's going to allow them to be successful and to be able to effectively engage their students in that virtual learning environment. Is there anything else you would add to that, Marty?
I think in point number 9 there at the top, just the in terms of the learning design, having, you know, interactions with, you know, with teachers is obviously amazingly important. And so that's synchronous work, that's real-time or live connection with teachers, that's certainly asynchronous work as well, just like we do in person, just like we do in a classroom. We have synchronous and asynchronous work. So that's definitely extremely important. What we're hinting at, and it's not actually a hint, it's actually we're stating, we're not sitting students behind a purchased platform and just hoping that learning happens. And so there's full interaction, there's learning design, that's extremely important. The other thing I'll just hint on as well is that this work is, we think about it just as we think about in-person learning. Now there are obviously some opportunities and some innovations that can come into play, and some, when we separate time and space, there's definitely some experience design work that can come into play. But in general, when we're thinking about the supports we provide to students in person, we do not disconnect that when we're thinking about providing those same services and supports to students who may be virtual, online, or remote. So we wanted to stop there and kind of hit on the really just questions that you might have. We want to take action. We want our Kentucky Board of Education to take action on the mechanics, the funding mechanics. And so that's set for August for our board to take action on. But prior to that, we want them to take action on, we're asking them to take action on behalf of superintendents and districts for the opportunity to expand the high quality elements of full-time enrolled online virtual and remote learning. And this would include, and one thing I didn't point out earlier, you may not be aware, but the performance-based definition and design I mentioned is for students 5 through 12. If we do not take action, then there is no opportunity for students K through 4. And so this opportunity would provide for an opportunity for K through 4 students. Definitely we take into consideration, and you as school district leaders take into consideration the types of supports that are needed for K through 4 students in this type of experience. And so with that consideration, with that opportunity comes additional responsibility and additional design work. And so that's important. And so, yeah, this is just, I think, a time for questions and for your thinking. It will be super helpful for us. So I'll pause, and I think we took a little bit more time than we were intending, so I apologize.
Okay, any questions from the group? While you all are thinking, I will start. I have a couple. So your action and the new quality measure, are you still going to leave the virtual performance-based option as an option?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
And then so you shared the timeline. So if the board starts to look first in August, so we're thinking these regs would go into effect for the 23-24 school year.
Perfect. Yeah, that's exactly right. And we actually we started the work 6 months ago or so, just to give ourselves enough time. There's certainly the year that it takes to get a regulation in place, but that's also implementation time for us to work with you.
So that's great, because I do think you might have some schools that have to really take their program and revise and rethink it quite a bit to move forward. So I'm glad to see you have a whole year. The one thing I did not see, and I know we're just looking at the list, but I would think it would be important that a district commit to not only how far is this virtual learning opportunity going to go, You know, is it going to be a K-12? Is it going to be stopped at middle school? Somewhere in their plan, they need that. And then they also need a kind of exit strategy. So what we are finding is, you know, if you start kindergarten virtually and you don't ever come to in-person, full-time in-person learning till third grade, all the socialization that would have taken place and was designed for in a kindergarten classroom might now have to roll over to third grade. So I think it's important that the reg required districts to have that kind of transition plan stated. Somehow, what do we do with students as they transition out, or if our program transitions? So in our district, we have worked to transition out the large virtual community we had the first year of the pandemic. And we have tried to stay on the front end of communicating to families way in advance of our intentions.
So that's such an awesome point, and one that has definitely been worked on and discussed and considered. The criteria, the enrollment criteria that each district has. What's really awesome is, and some folks would argue if it's awesome or not. I think it's awesome. Is that you know, everyone's program is a little bit different. And folks, based on the resources that they have in district or in school, are providing an experience that's different than their neighbors, and I think it's awesome because it's the right thing for that local context, and or they find out that it's not the right thing and they shift really quickly. So we have programs throughout the state that are 6 through 12. We have programs that are K through 5. We have programs that are K through 12, and what we work on strategically, and you will also see in guidance post, or we'll implement that guidance as the regulatory language moves forward, hopefully, is the coaching that it requires for on-ramps and off-ramps, the coaching that requires for criteria of enrollment to ensure that students have the right supports and that kind of thing. So exactly what you refer to, Janet Beth, is super important.
Other thoughts or questions for Mickey, Marty, and Ben?
This is Chuck. I do have some questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, Absolutely.
Chuck. Okay, thank you. I missed some of the slides, so I apologize. And I just finally got back to where some of the slides were. And you might have already stated this. But for example, when you talk about attendance base, give me an example of what you mean by attendance base, and give me an example of what you mean by full-time virtual.
Mm-hmm. So great questions. And I'm glad you asked the question because it's really important to this conversation. So number one, the attendance-based structure. So there's really two different funding mechanisms when we enroll students, and one of those is the traditional attendance-based structure where students, and let's think in person, right? So students come in person and they have a schedule, and we take attendance as required. And so that's the funding mechanism for that. That builds into the SCAAC formula. That's how districts get funded. The other opportunity is performance-based structures, and there's the funding mechanism for performance-based structures is a pass-fail funding mechanism. In other words, if a student is in a performance-based, let's just say one course, if they're in a performance-based course all year long, and they do not pass the course, then the district does not get funding for that course. And so this is a two-part, this is a two-step dance. This is the structures that are what we refer to as program requirements or program standards, and then there's the funding mechanism that has to be connected to it. And so attendance-based structures will point funding mechanism or mechanics will point to these program standards that we're talking about. We've never had statewide wraparound program standards for online virtual and remote learning. And I want to add that's full-time because that points to your second question. So full-time is a student who is not coming on campus. If you think about a fifth grade student who has a full structure, a full load that's enrolled in a online virtual and remote program offered by the school district, they're not intended to come on campus on a regular, not that they can't come to campus, and they will actually, they will come to campus for several things. But on a daily basis, they're not structured to come to a district or school campus. And at the high school level, you think about it the same way. The students are enrolled in courses throughout their day, where they may not come to campus every day. And that's a full-time enrolled student, full-time enrolled in an online virtual and remote program. We have different programs set up already today. So we have programs that are district level programs that all schools in the district can enroll students into. And then we have what we refer to as academy models, where it's a school within a school. And so it's a full-time enrollment opportunity for students that is really structured inside, let's say a traditional in-person A1 high school. So it's an academy, it's a virtual learning academy inside of that. So students are still connected to their school in many ways. They just may not come to campus every day for their full schedule. Hopefully that answered your questions. Those are great questions.
Yeah, and I do have one more, if I may, Madam Chair. When you talk about virtual high school, I hear you saying that some of these folks, some of these students will be coming back. Some will, it's according to what the schedule is for that individual students. So if they're on virtual in virtual high school, will that diploma come from that high school, or will that be a different type of diploma? And that's my last question.
So again, that's an awesome question, and that's a local decision on how that is structured. Whether it is if it's an academy inside of the in-person traditional high school, then the district will have, and the school will have some discussions and some decision points there. But there is an opportunity for, and we see a lot of examples where it could be a different diploma. But in general, we see if the requirements are the same and the work is the same and the courses are designed with the same, because we know that all the courses will be aligned with the Kentucky Academic Standards with high quality, and students are performing at the level that's expected. Then we also see a local decision to have the same diploma. It's to answer your question, that's a local decision. But it's a great question.
Okay, other questions or thoughts?
Hi, I do have one, I think, quick question, but what would the teacher certification requirements be in a school like this? So I know in our last minute, do whatever we have to do, people monitored all kinds of subject areas they weren't certified for. So what would it be in this scenario?
Hi, Renee, by the way. Good to see you.
Hi.
So the same certification requirements. So the design would be that there are Kentucky certified teachers working the program as teachers, as facilitators, as instructional designers, and specifically be a resource for students if they get stuck on something, that the right content, the right Kentucky certified content teacher can work with that student. Now we know that there's some opportunity once the district or after a district has selected content that is tied and aligned with Kentucky academic standards. There's some opportunity there, but I think you'll be pleased to know that the same class size requirements, all those things are represented inside the proposed regulatory language.
Other thoughts or questions?
It was extremely important for us to recognize, Renee, to your question, that Kentucky students were being serviced and led by Kentucky certified teachers. That's a different approach than some other states have taken, but we felt extremely it was extremely important to take that approach here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, as always, you can reach out to Marty, Mickey, or Ben with questions or additional thoughts. I will say I'm glad there's a year leeway because I think some of our associations, in particular the Kentucky High School Athletic Association and KEMA, those folks will have to get their heads together and follow suit as well.
Absolutely. And just one final word on that. We have already engaged with the Kentucky High School Athletic Association in initial conversations, and they already have a really good start on the language that's needed for their work. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Marty. It is 9:16. I'm going to let Mickey Ray continue on, and she's got Sarah Peace with her. And they're going to talk a little bit about amendments to the minimum requirements for high school graduation, the early graduation program. If you all can hang in here, we'll take a quick break after this. So that'll put us right about halfway through the meeting. Mickey, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair Francis and members of the committee. We are happy to be here today to discuss with you the amendments to 704 KAR 3305. So this is the minimum high school graduation regulation, but the changes that we will be discussing today focus specifically around the early graduation program, and that is capital letters, early graduation program. And Sarah Peace, the policy advisor from the Office of Teaching and Learning, she's actually going to walk you through the regulatory amendments. But to begin, I want us to think about this guiding question. And this is something that internally we have discussed and we have worked with through different external partners as well. So the question guiding our presentation today is, how do we elevate the long-term success of accelerated learners interested in completing the early graduation program? And I'm going to state that just one more time. So how do we elevate the long-term success of accelerated learners who were interested in completing the early graduation program? And so, Sarah, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. I want to begin just by providing some context around legislative changes that occurred in 2022. So there were amendments made to KRS 158.142, and this is the statute, the larger umbrella that establishes the early graduation program and provides for early graduation participants to be awarded a high school diploma. They also receive an early graduation certificate, and they get a scholarship through KIA to be used at any 2-year or 4-year Kentucky public institution. So Senate Bill 1 became effective just this week, well, last week, I guess I should say now, so July 14th of this year. And that legislation contained 2 amendments that required us within the Office of Teaching and Learning to revise 704 KR 3305. And so first, Senate Bill 61, it eliminates the requirements related to end of course assessments. And you all are well versed on this in this committee. So that product is no longer produced or supported by the vendor, nor was it aligned to the reviewed and revised Kentucky academic standards. So that language was removed from the larger statute. Secondly, the bill removed ACT as the specific named vendor for the college entrance examination. And that was done just to provide more long-term flexibility. We know that educational practices and state level contracts tend to evolve, but the college readiness benchmark requirements you will see are still found within Section 5 of 3305, and we'll be discussing those a bit more today. So those statutory changes required us to begin considering what should be changed within the regulation. And so in In combination with that, we analyzed internal data along with data provided by KY Stats to form the basis of the amendments that Sarah plans to walk you through in just a moment. So we were informed that the data that we have, though, cannot control for students who do not accept the scholarship if they're attending an out-of-state institution or a private institution. So the numbers that you're seeing on the slide today, they are relevant to those students who went to a public 2-year, 4-year university and utilized the scholarship. So as you can see, the number of students who participate in this program is relatively low, with approximately 100 students participating per year. And just to hit on what something that Marty said earlier, it does impact a relatively small percentage of students, but we still want to ensure that this program is effective and ensures their long-term success if they earn that early graduation certificate and have the scholarship and their diploma. You can see there that the students who enroll in the early graduation program, they represent the academic potential that you would expect. So you can see here 85% of EGP students meet or exceed both CPE benchmarks and national ACT benchmarks. Furthermore, on average, that next point, 90% of students have a 3.0 high school GPA or higher. And in our discussions with CPE, this data became especially noteworthy. There was a 2009 study that was conducted by Princeton, and it found that students who earn a 3.0 GPA and higher have a 50% higher probability of graduating from a 4-year college. So we know that that GPA is important, and we wanted to make sure that we looked at that as we were considering any amendments to this regulation. The concerning thing, though, is this next component. So when analyzing the post-secondary outcomes of these students, concerns arise regarding their post-secondary graduation rate. So for instance, you can see that 66% of EGP students completed 1 semester at a post-secondary institution, but only 48% completed a degree program or certificate. And of those, 26% completed a bachelor's degree, 12% earned a certificate, and then 1% completed an associate's degree. So this data collectively provided valuable information that informed our regulatory amendments, because again, we want to ensure that these students, if they're earning this certificate and completing the EGP program, that they're equipped and empowered to be successful when they graduate high school, whether that's going into the post-secondary institution or within their career choice. So in creating amendments to the EGP, again, we were intentional in using database decision making, but we also solicited feedback from internal and external partners, as I mentioned earlier. So this has been before SCAAC at this point. The Kentucky Board of Education did review this item at the last board meeting. But prior to that, we were in talks with CPE and KIA because, again, we wanted to ensure that our decisions supported the use of that scholarship that is associated with this program specifically. We further leaned upon United We Learn, that vision for education in Kentucky when we're thinking about vibrant student experience, and then also conversations that are occurring statewide around that portrait of a learner or graduate. So Sarah, I'm going to ask you now if you will walk the committee through the specific amendments, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mickey. And it is a pleasure to present before you today. I am going to, as Mickey stated, walk through the different regulatory amendments that have taken place as a result of the bill. And I want to make sure technology-wise, we're still working great. Okay, thank you. To begin, there were just some standard technical amendments that we made. Those include amendments just to conform to the updated language that was provided in Senate Bill 61, such as the removal of end-of-course exams. We also took an opportunity to create a better distinction between the early graduation program, which Mickey mentioned is now capital EGP, versus graduating early, which are 2 different things that sound a lot alike. For students who just graduate early without being enrolled in the program, they still meet all the requirements of any other student, both state and local, but they just maybe do so on an accelerated timeline and might graduate a semester earlier, something like that. For students who choose to formally enroll in the early graduation program, they are given a specific set of requirements, and then upon completion of the program, they earn their diploma and a early graduation certificate and a scholarship from KIA. We also, the third point here is that we made it the update that the ILP is established at the beginning of grade 6 to provide ample time for being able to support students. And then lastly, the technical amendment that we made was moving the date in which EGP students must be entered into Infinite Campus. It was October 1st. Now it's October 15th because we know throughout the states there are a lot of different school calendars to meet your local community needs, and we wanted to make sure you had ample time to add those students into Infinite Campus. In the slides that follow, I'm going to go through the substantive changes of the early graduation program itself, which is in Section 5 of the regulation. I'll begin with the requirements for this upcoming 22-23 school year, and then move to 23-24 and 24-25. The goal in walking you through the changes over this 3-year period is to represent the scaling that is put into place, so that way we can provide districts and schools with ample time that they need to create a powerful and authentic experience for students in this program that will allow them to thrive later on in life once they graduate. Okay, so I will move to, let's see, here we go. All right, beginning with this upcoming academic year, the requirements for students who enter the early graduation program. This looks a little bit different just because of timing. Senate Bill 61, as Mickey mentioned, became effective in July last week. But the regulatory amendments that I'm discussing right now will not go through the full process until spring of 2023. So you have this sort of transitional year before you move on to the more substantive changes. Therefore, the requirements for students in 22-23 are very similar to what they have experienced before. They will have to communicate their intent to participate in the program within the timeline provided in the regulation. They still have to meet all the CPE college entrance exam benchmarks as they had before. And then they also must complete at least one financial literacy program or course, and that is specified in statute, which I've listed here, 158-1411. Districts are free to accelerate this timeline as I move to the 23-24 school year, but you are not required to do so. It's just a courtesy of time. That way your district and schools can make the decision that is best for them. Okay, for students who enter the program in 23-24, they still have to meet those that are in that I just discussed for the upcoming school year, but these will layer upon those, and I'll walk you through each one briefly. The highlights are listed here for you in terms of the district, school, and student.
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. They can't see the 23-24. They're still looking at 22-23.
Thank you. Thank you so much. There we go. Can you see that now? Okay, excellent. So just to walk through the highlights, now that you can see the 23-24 school year, I want to start with the district, and the purpose of their EGP policy is to really provide a framework for schools that uses the ILP as a mechanism to provide ongoing support for the students when they're in the program. As I mentioned, you can update your current EGP policy, or you're free to create a new one if you'd wish. The regulation requires that districts align their EGP policy also to the established Essential Workplace Ethics Program indicators, which are already in place by districts, but they contain such important areas of focus, such as adaptability and diligence and initiative, things that students really need if they have a desire to graduate early and enter the post-secondary workforce or continue their education. The district policy also will include a requirement that the student must complete a resume, a professional resume, and then we also ask that they complete one post-secondary admissions application. We aren't requiring students to actually send those applications. Sometimes there are fees associated, but just the act of walking through the steps it takes, and hopefully the student will use that application to be able to send in and move forward with their goals and desires. For the school, they're really utilizing the ILP to work and support with that student with their comprehensive school counselor. They will work together to really say, okay, what requirements have you met? What requirements have you not met yet? And let's strategize together how to best achieve these. So the student really has an idea of what this entails, and then they will develop a strategy that the student will guide and develop with help from the school counselor, and then share that strategy and their goals with an entrance interview with the principal or committee designee to articulate this long-term plan. Again, another opportunity to practice a very important skill before being launched out into the world. The student requirements here, as I mentioned, the CPE benchmarks, the financial literacy requirements, all of those are still in place, but the students will also have to earn the 10 foundational credits. This is a substantive change on the student side, in addition to meeting the other requirements that I've already discussed so far. The purpose of this is to provide students with the baseline foundational knowledge that they need and exposure to the different content areas before they move on beyond high school. For the final year, the 24-25 school year, this is the last year of the rollout of the implementation of these changes. Again, some districts may choose to just build upon all the different policies that have been in place. None of those are necessarily new. It's just they are free to edit the policy as they see fit. For the 24-25 academic year, the final programmatic element that really rounds out the experience of the student is an opportunity to demonstrate their attainment of critical skills and competencies that are so important to success later on via a performance-based project, portfolio, or capstone. A lot of districts already have opportunities similar to these in place. And the requirements of the school and district take a similar approach to what I had shared on the previous slide, meaning that the district establishes the policy outlining the performance-based procedures, but the school implements it using their own performance descriptors and evaluation procedures that best meet the context of their local community. The school or district may continue to operate on that accelerated timeline, but the option that is most attractive to you and your local context is really what we would like for you to be able to work from and how we structured the changes. The KDE is asking that schools retain the student work product for 5 years so we can just study the impact of these changes and look at the same data that Mickey was able to walk through for you. Lastly, from this, and most importantly, from the student perspective and how they are able to successfully demonstrate critical skills and competencies, the performance-based component must be designed to allow the student to represent the personal attainment of the essential workplace ethics indicators, their ability to apply the Kentucky academic standards as a lifelong learner and engaged citizen, the ability to effectively utilize written and communication skills, which were intentionally embedded along the way to help prepare the student. And lastly, the student must demonstrate an ability to think critically, synthesize information, and draw conclusions. The final student requirement is especially powerful opportunity because it allows the student to independently showcase what they have accomplished, their ability to transfer knowledge and skills that they have practiced throughout the program. That concludes the overview of the amendments made to the regulation. We will be providing you with guidance to just give you resources that might be helpful and supportive as you implement these changes. And the first piece of information that you will receive is just specific to Senate Bill 61 and the changes that will be incorporated in just a few weeks.
Okay, at this time, does anybody have questions for Mickey or Sarah?
I have a quick question, and I'm sure I missed it, but that October 15 deadline to enter their intent into Infinite Campus, that's October 15th of which year?
So Sarah, if you can speak to that. So in the existing regulation before the amendments go through, so for the 22-23 students,
yes,
the intent form would still be October 1. But when the regulation passes, so we're looking at the 23-24 academic year, it would move from October 1 to October 15, just to give a little bit more time for schools and districts to identify those students, collect the intent form, and then get that updated in Infinite Campus.
But that's at any year for the student, like
yes,
their senior
well,
year, their junior
the
year.
year that they intend to graduate. So when they are declaring their intent into the program, that's when it would be entered into Infinite Campus.
Okay, that's what I was asking, because they talked about this starting at the 6th grade and identifying. So I just want to make sure that was in the year they plan to graduate. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
And that is very helpful question that I can include in our guidance as well.
Other thoughts or questions for Mickey or Sarah?
And I would just ask the committee, and I am sorry to interrupt any question that may or may be coming, but I would ask of the committee, as we start implementing this and as you start to see the guidance be released, if there are local needs that are not addressed, please, don't wait for us to appear back at a committee meeting. Again, our email addresses are provided for you, and we welcome your feedback because we want to ensure that schools and districts have adequate support when they begin rolling out changes to the program. Again, it doesn't impact a large group of students, but for those students who are completing the program, it is very important that they have the support that's needed.
Go ahead, please, Martha.
I don't want to get into a long discussion of this. I know it's a long meeting, but as a lay member of this group, I'm wondering how this is any better than just having early graduation.
So what this allows for is that they are able to graduate. I mean, in theory, if they declare their intent as a sophomore, if they've completed all of those 10 foundational credits, if they have completed all the requirements per the year that Sarah just discussed, then they could actually leave without having earned the traditional 22 credits that are the state minimum. So it's designed for those students who truly are accelerated and wanting to go on and enter into post-secondary education, and they can do that earlier.
Not to, okay, you just don't have to tell me more than okay. The thing that I think I missed was they don't have to go ahead and get everything they would have had to attain. They can skip getting all the credits. Okay, I missed that crucial thing. I thought they were doing these other things and still had to have so okay, they are allowed to miss things. That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
And Mickey, if I also may add, another distinctive component is the scholarship piece from TIA and the early graduation certificate.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Thank you.
As always, and just to reiterate what Mickey said, please reach out to Mickey or Sarah if you have other questions. And Dr. Kelly Foster has to go to another commitment, so she wants to present really fast, so we don't want to miss out on what she has to say. This was a request from our committee, so hang in there, folks. We will get to a break, but I want to turn it over to Dr. Foster.
Thank you. I know what it's like to be the person between the break or person between the lunch. So I promise you that I will be quick. And I'll be glad to come back later on in the fall to discuss a little bit more if we need to. So let me just first start off with telling you why I don't have any slides today. Nothing that I'm saying to you has actually been approved by the U.S. Department of Education. So I'm hesitant to put anything in writing that can be shared out. We currently have our state plan, which US Ed has, and they are looking at. We've been going back and forth with them for several months on that, as well as an addendum and a COVID addendum. So I will say that US Ed has been very willing to work with us on flexibility around COVID. Fall of 22 will be the first time that we will be exiting CSI schools or ATSI schools since the fall of, let's see, 19. It will also be the first time that we will be identifying CSI schools or TSI schools. So lots of things will be happening this fall in my office around school improvement. So the first question that you all pose to me is how are schools that are currently identified receiving services, what is going to be their opportunity to exit? And so I'll walk through two categories. The first one would be the CSI schools, and those are the schools that are, when they were identified, they were performing in the bottom 5% of all schools, or they had a high school graduation rate below 80%. So what we have proposed to Ed, and we're waiting on the final approval for. If you are a CSI school and looking to exit based on the data from the spring 22 assessment, to exit comprehensive support and improvement status, CSI, in the fall of 22, identified schools must no longer meet the criteria for identification and demonstrate progress. So if you were identified as a school that was performing in the bottom 5%, to exit, you no longer will be, you should not be in the bottom 5% in the fall of 22, and you have to have shown progress. And that will be based on the spring assessment that they took in the spring of 22. And then, of course, if they were identified as a high school with a below 80% graduation rate, then based on the spring 22 data, they cannot have a graduation rate below 80% and they must show progress. The other category that is currently identified are ATSI, which stands for Additional Targeted and Support Schools. And to exit the Additional Targeted Support and Improvement status in the fall of 22, the identified school must no longer meet the criteria for the identification that put them in that status, based on the group, and I'll talk about that shortly, and they must show progress in that identification group. So if they were identified as an ATSI school based on the special education population, so that means that their special ed population was performing as poorly as the bottom 5% of all schools in the state. So the group that they were identified for no longer is performing as poorly as the bottom 5%, and they have to show progress. So I'll stop right there before we talk about identification to see if you have any questions about schools that would be eligible to exit in the fall. It's pretty simple. It's a lot of words, but you basically have to be out of the category that puts you in and show some sort of progress. And I go ahead.
I was just going to say the progress is based on from the 2019 data.
Yes, because we don't have any other data. So I'll be working very closely with Rhonda's team. They actually do all the magic behind the scenes with the numbers. And so that'll be based on that 2019 data because we didn't take the test in 20. And then we had some waivers in the 21 test where not all students had to come in and take that assessment. So showing progress from 2019 until the spring 2022 test.
Other questions?
Okay, I will move to identification in the fall of 2022. So in the fall of 2022, based on the spring assessment for 22, we will identify CSI schools and TSI schools. And so CSI actually has 3 categories. The first category internally we call CSI 1, and that means if you have a school that is performing performing the bottom 5% of all schools. So that would be CSI 1. So based on the spring 22 test data, if your school is performing the bottom 5% of schools at the elementary level, middle level, or high level, we do that for 3 individual levels, and that's all schools in the state, Title I or non-Title I schools. That's how you would be identified for CSI 1. CSI 2 would be if you're a high school and you have a graduation rate below 80%. That doesn't matter if your high school is a Title I school or a non-Title I school. It's all about that grad rate of 80%. And then CSI 3, we won't be identifying for that this year because of COVID and the additional waivers. CSI 3 is if you are an additional target and support school and have had that title for 3 years. And so with the changes in accountability and COVID and additional waivers, we don't have anybody that will be eligible for that. So the 2 that we'll be identifying for in the fall are CSI 1 and CSI 2. And then the second, it's actually the third category, but second major one, TSI. So TSI schools, and I'm going to read this one to you, 1 or more of the same subgroups performing as poorly as all students in any of the lowest performing 5% of Title I schools or non-Title I schools by level, elementary, middle, or high, based on the 21-22 data. So if you have a subgroup that is performing as poorly as those bottom 5% schools, elementary, middle, and high, if one of those subgroups is performing as poorly as that, then that subgroup would be identified in your school as TSI. And so we work really close with Rhonda's group on this. Once that data goes out, she gives me the information on those specific schools. And, we try to make this as painless as possible because we recognize that nobody really wants to be identified for anything. So I reach out to each individual school personally. And then we have one-on-one sessions scheduled in October to meet with those schools. We invite principal leadership as well as district leadership to talk about what does it mean to be CSI, what does it mean to be TSI, and then walk them through the process of their diagnostic review and their federal dollars and the whole school turnaround. So we really pride ourselves in, once you're identified and you have a minute to kind of take a deep breath, we want to meet with you one-on-one to walk you through the process because there are really lots of great professional learning opportunities if you are identified, as well as federal funding to help with your school improvement. So I'll be glad to take any questions.
Hey, I have one quick question while people think of them. Our in count, I believe, is up to 30. Is that correct? And so when you think of subpopulations, you would need to have met the in count. Is that correct, Kelly?
I'm going to defer to Rhonda and Jennifer on that, but I believe the answer is correct, is yes.
That's correct. It is 30 at this point.
Other questions? So we need to keep our eyes out for the reg. Kelly cannot share it yet, but it will probably be shared in the state board. So follow the agenda for the
Well,
state board.
it's really not the reg. Our
Oh,
school improvement reg is finalized. USAID just offered different flexibilities because of COVID. And so Kentucky has submitted that, and we're just waiting on their final approval. But everything that I shared with you today is what is actually in that addendum.
okay, great. So we're just waiting on federal approval. We hope we have it around the time all the state assessment results come out. So
fingers crossed.
If you have other questions, you can email Kelly directly.
Sure. And if you have any questions about our school improvement work at all, feel free to reach out.
Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break. It's 9:50 here on Central Time, 10:50 for you all Eastern Time. So we'll take a quick 10-minute break. Please try to get back on. And we have a couple items left on the agenda. So 10-minute break. Thank you, everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. And we are moving ahead with our agenda. And as I like to call them, the dynamic duo is next. On our agenda, we have an assessment and accountability update from Rhonda Sims and Jennifer Stafford.
Jana Beth, real quick before Rhonda and Jennifer go, we had a few members, this is Melissa, who joined us after I did roll call at the beginning. I was just going to give them the opportunity, since this is a public meeting, to state that they're present. Heather Aldrich, I see that you signed in.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. And then also we have Leslie Jeffries. Leslie, are you still present with us this morning?
I am. Hi, thank you. Yeah, sorry, I had some technical difficulties, but thank you to Ben and Jennifer for your help. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks so much. Okay, sorry about that, Jana Beth, Rhonda, and
No
Jennifer.
problem. Okay, Jennifer and Rhonda.
All right. Well, thank you all. I don't know how dynamic we are on a Tuesday, but we'll try to answer some questions. And more importantly for us is to always get some feedback and ideas from you. This committee has always been such an integral part of our work in the Office of Assessment and Accountability. And we always find it a pleasure to work with you. And we're really excited that we've convinced Melissa Chandler to join us to kind of help facilitate that and be in process. So I'm Rhonda Sims, and I'm the Associate Commissioner, and I don't go anywhere without Jennifer Stafford if I can help it. So I see that Jennifer's on camera. And Jennifer, I don't know if you want to say hello before we get rolling here.
Good morning, everyone. Jennifer Stafford from the Office of Assessment and Accountability, and we really appreciate the members for being here and committing to our important work, and especially thanks to the presenters as well, everyone who gave the efforts to prepare for the meeting. So appreciate everyone's attention and look forward to the discussion this morning.
And because we don't really have our chat function with this particular type of device that we're using today and process for sharing, this is a public meeting. We're going to pause periodically, to get your comments, to get your feedback. So we'll stop along the way. Feel free to come off mute and ask a question as we're going along, where it doesn't bother us at all. We want to see this. We have a formal thing here in a PowerPoint, but we want this to be more conversational. We're going to give you some slides here at the beginning, the first part that I'm going to do with you, that gives you some background. It's things you could take away and use and share with others. They are a lot of the information that we've gone over with you before in the past, and you may have encountered it in some other group or meeting. So we'll not spend a lot of time on each of those things, but we want to maybe give everybody kind of a common context for where we're at right now and kind of why we're in sort of the flow that we're in. Obviously, key to us is that conversation with you. So we tried to capture that here in the guiding questions. And you will see that we're looking to get some ideas from you on what other kinds of information might be helpful, might be needed, what kind of resources you'd like to see come out related to the new accountability system. Are there some areas you think are a bit more confusing, might need more explanation? Because we're kind of giving you a good base here today. And Jennifer has a fabulous team. We are in two divisions in the Office of Assessment Accountability. Jennifer leads the division around the support and the information, and Kevin Hill around the data. And we do an awful lot of cross work in developing information, and we always meet with each other and have good feedback. We also take it to our DAC advisor and other groups. And so we're always interested to make it better and to do what is necessary for the field. So those are the two kind of context questions we want you to have in mind as we move through today. Now, an agenda in terms of just this part, here are the key things we're going to talk about. We're going to give you a little history lesson back to 2019. Sometimes I think my whole world is shaped around pandemic and not pandemic, and you probably feel the same way some days. And so we're going to go back a little bit to 2019. We're going to review just some key things about Senate Bill 158, because this is the first time we're really implementing 158, which is our last legislation around assessment accountability. We're going to talk about the 2022 reporting, what's planned for that. Then we'll look ahead a bit another year down the road to what is accountability like in 22, 23. And then we'll highlight a few other key things at the end, like you've talked about science today. We'll talk about the assessment blueprint, which is the next piece once you have the standards that lead to a test being developed. And then Jennifer has some resources that we want to make you aware of. They've been designed for districts and for schools, but they'll be helpful to anyone who wants to talk about assessment accountability. So she'll highlight that for you as well. So if you've seen Jennifer and I together, we're very comfortable with each other. We work together a lot. She's just the best of partners in a professional environment. And so we'll go back and forth. She may add something I didn't emphasize as much. I might add something with her. So we're very informal with that, even though we're kind of in a formal structure here. So just to kind of go back a little bit in time, in 2019 was the last time we had any kind of formal accountability. And you heard Kelly Foster a few moments ago talk about that a little bit, because that set in place some status for schools that now we've got sort of the first opportunity to change in this year. So back in 2019, we did do a formal accountability system. We did have a reporting mechanism, and you may remember we used stars. We had a star rating. That was probably the shortest accountability system the state of Kentucky has ever had, because it lasted 1 year. Usually they last about 7 years before there's some tweaking of them, but this was a super quick change. And so 2019 was only in place for 1 year. And so then we get into the 2020 legislative session, and Senate Bill 158 is passed. And it is passed really right before the pandemic shuts everything down. So the session, is in the spring of the year, really late winter into moving towards spring. So in January, February, by March, we pretty much were shut down in Kentucky with the pandemic of 20. So Senate Bill 158 passed, but it didn't have any language in it anticipating a pandemic or a timeline anticipating a pandemic. So we've had some tweaks to it because of that timeline. So in 19 and 20, in terms of what we did with testing, there was only access, that's the test for English language learners, and what we call alternate access for our students that are the 1% population with most severe disability. That testing got in and was finished, because that usually concludes by about mid-February. We had no testing of the summative test. There was no accountability. There was full waiver, no testing, no reporting, no accountability. When we move on to the next school year of 2021, we had our accountability regulation going through because of the changes of Senate Bill 158. We tested, but we said, do your best. Test who you can test. Try to make it happen. We were much lower on our participation rate than typical. Kentucky has exceptionally high participation. We're way up in the upper 90%. What we ended up with was somewhere roughly it averaged 80 something across all schools. Our elementaries did better. There was up in the 90%, like low 90s, late high 80s for elementaries. For middle, we were in the 80s. For high schools, we were in the 70s. So that's very low. Some districts had higher percentages than others, but just holistically. So because so much was missing, there wasn't a lot we could do with that. So it was publicly reported. Then in 21, 22, back to approaching some level of normalcy with testing. So we did full testing this spring, and accountability will be this fall, and it will include status only. And we'll talk about that in just a moment in a little more detail. Then in 22, 23, we anticipate we'll still have full testing, and accountability would fully be in place as described in Senate Bill 158, which would include the notion of change or improvement from 1 year to the next. So as we go to Senate Bill 158, because that's really what we're getting ready to bring fully into being, and lots of work has had to happen to get there. But some key things about Senate Bill 158 from the 2020 session, it did give you a list and us a list of state indicators. Here are the combination of academic and school quality factors we think belong in an accountability system. Now that varies a bit from history, Because historically, there have been some key things around, we want you to do a particular kind of testing, but typically the State Board of Education has kind of put together the accountability system. So Senate Bill 158 is more prescriptive for an accountability system than what we've seen in prior laws, but it gives an exclusive list. To us, that means you can't add to it and you can't take away from it. The list is the list. It requires that all these indicators be evaluated on status and on something called change. And we're going to, it defines those terms, and we'll look at those on the next slide. And then it says, once you put this system all together, we would like to see it on an online colored dashboard. So this system is very similar to pieces of the California system, which uses color to mainly communicate, particularly to the public and to parents. Now, still, keep in mind, no matter the color, there are a set of numbers behind the scenes that let us know when we go from one color to the next. So for school-based people who work closely with this, and for those of you in roles where you're doing policy and leadership within districts, you're still going to probably want to know some things about the numbers. But the color helps to communicate more simply about something that's still quite complex. So in 21-22, the accountability system regulation is listed here. It's the 270 is the final digits of that. That became effective November 30th. Now, one reminder, I think Janabeth asked a question about this earlier and Jennifer responded. We do have a change of minimum in this accountability reporting. So it raises the minimum in to 30 students for all students and student groups. And so we need 30 students across the school level, not across a grade, but across the school level. For most schools, this will be very similar reporting to what we had when we did 10 per grade. Because if you got 3 grades and you had 10 in a grade, you got 30 in a school. But there will be some where there's an oddly configured school that might see a difference in the reporting related to this. I'll also mention that federally, all schools are expected to be in the system. So you still have to report schools, and the reporting might be a little slimmer because of your minimum in, but you still have to reflect all your schools in the final reporting. So these are the indicators. I won't read them for you, but you can see that it's still about test, and they're in reading and math and science are the 3 required by the federal government. But Kentucky also has social studies and writing as part of their assessment. We have to also include our English language learners and how is their achievement of English, their acquisition of English, and their progress in acquiring English. And then climate, school, the quality of school climate and safety. Kentucky's using a survey for that measure right now. The law prescribes will include this category. And there's also a federal component here, which is school quality, but it doesn't say how. So right now, Kentucky uses a survey for that piece. Post-secondary readiness has had some recent changes in legislation so that meeting one indicator will make a student post-secondary ready. And then finally, graduation rate. And that's the most consistent value we've had for many, many years. And that is one that federal level puts a high priority on. So looking at all of those indicators in 2 lenses is what eventually will happen when the system is fully in place. For this year, it will only be this first one, which is status. Status is defined as your student performance on the current year. So what we tested in the school year of 21-22 is reported in the fall of 22, and it's how did students do in that school year or all the factors that get reported that year. And status is most like what we've always had. We didn't call it that, but it is what we've done in the past, which is your current year performance. Now, beginning next year, the Senate bill says we need to also incorporate the idea of change. And that is their difference between this year's score and next year's score. So the difference between your first year status is always the current year, but your status last year compared to your status the next year is changed. So obviously we need 2 years in the same system before we can generate change. Now, all of the timelines for this are a bit off from the original legislation because the original legislation didn't plan for a pandemic, as none of us did. So for 2 years, we really did not have testing that we can move forward with and say, this is year one. So this year, what we've just completed is that first year, and next year would be change. Now, because it's the first year, we have to do quite a bit of standard setting. Now, in the testing, we do a standard setting that says what scores are needed, what performance for a student to be novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished. And we're doing that with the assessments. Kentucky teachers are working through facilitated with our vendors, and they'll do standard setting on those 4 categories of student performance. But we also have to do standard setting on the accountability system. How do we get to those colors? We talk about reporting. How do we know when a school is at the different levels we're going to report? And we'll look at what's going to be reported in a minute. Jennifer's going to go through that for you. So we're going to do a standard setting this year on status alone. We'll have to come and revisit again next year where we do status and change put together. The Office of Assessment Accountability is hosting this. The dates are September 13, 14. And we'll bring together a group of, I think right now we're looking at 27 people. So we'll work in 3 groups of 9. And we will host that across that 2-day experience. Now, it's being facilitated by testing experts with the Center for Assessment. So many of you know Brian Gong. You've worked with Brian in the past, and they'll be our facilitator for that work. I will say to you that Janet Beth has agreed to represent SCAAC as the chair at that committee, but we also have one other member because she is also a principal and has worked with the L3, and that is Artavia, I think, has agreed to serve on the committee. So SCAAC will actually have 2 people who will be represented. We'll also ask for 2 people in the Kentucky board to join us as well. Now, you will notice that Senate Bill 158 has a requirement about who approves this idea of the cut score or the percentile cut score for setting the standards. And it is very specific to KDE. So Dr. Glass will be obviously our designee, our representative for KDE, and LSAC, the Local Superintendent Advisory Council. It does not say Kentucky Board of Education, but we have asked that 2 board members participate in the process, and we have also asked that 2 individuals who are on LSAC participate in the full process. Then we will have a meeting, I think it's scheduled on the 19th. Jennifer, I think, has that in one of her later slides, but we will have a special meeting with LSAC to bring forward these cuts for their approval. And I think right now that's scheduled for the 19th of September. So let's move forward to one final piece of legislation. We'll stop
Can
there
I
and
ask a quick question?
Sure.
Actually, I think go ahead with this because I think it connects.
Yeah, and then I think we've got a nice little break before we go to reporting. So the statute language does talk about the LSAC being approving and the department, and the cut scores are supposed to remain in a place for 6 years unless they don't differentiate low performing schools from high performing schools. Now, that 6-year clock really can't fully start until we have both pieces of the system in place. So we will have to revisit standards when we put together status and change. Right now, it's just the status component. So we really kind of have half of it, and we have to do the other half on year 2. So let's pause there and see kind of what questions you have, and then Jennifer's going to lead on these next slides where we actually get into the reporting a little bit for 2022.
Okay, my question is just, I think, a point of clarification.
Uh-huh.
When you all say indicator, that means reading and math combined, science, social studies, and writing combined?
Yes.
They're not going to have a cut for reading and a cut for math. It's the combined group. Is that correct?
What we end up reporting is the combined. There is obviously, for when we go back to the lowest level, which is how does a student perform, we will have assessment results for reading, which aggregate together what's your percentage of novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished? But I think when we get to the indicator level, we're putting reading and math together in a combined fashion. Jennifer, that's your understanding of it as well, isn't it?
That's correct. So we've talked multiple times about the differences between assessment and accountability. And assessments and reporting on that will be around the student performance, school performance, district performance on those different subject areas. So you can expect information on assessment and the performance of the students in the school around each of those content areas: reading, math, on-demand writing, which includes editing, mechanics, and on-demand writing combined for writing, as well as like science, social studies, and so forth. So you'll have each of those individually for the assessment performance. Then for accountability, which is different from assessment, we take those and combine those into the indicators and provide indicator scores and information around those indicators. And Rhonda mentioned those indicators earlier, and I went back to the slide here so that it's very clear what those indicators of accountability are in the new system.
And in a moment, when Jennifer talks about reporting, you'll see that same heading when we talk about the weight. What percentage in the overall system does reading and math count? Science, social studies, and writing. So that means reading and math, for most schools, it's going to be a straight 50-50. For science, social studies, and writing, it'll be a straight third. Occasionally we have a school that doesn't have a component, and we still have that ability to spread the value across what you do have. And that's a long-term rule that we've used for many years, because we can get, like a 6-only center or something that's configured very oddly, and you don't have the full range of the test.
Rhonda
Good
or
question. Heather?
or Jennifer, either one. For the indicator of quality of school climate and safety, how is that factored? How does that 4%, how is that factored with that? Is it based on participation of the students that answered that, or how they answered that, positively or negatively?
It's looking at, it will first of all have a standard setting activity with that, the number of points that have basically been generated from it. And so it starts like all other the pieces, and that, what's the data show us, what's the assessment results. And then there are really sort of benchmarks set along the scale for that. And then they will roll in eventually at 4%.
Okay.
And I think we actually are working on a calculation spreadsheet. Most of you know John Wickheiser, who's been around forever. John is working on a spreadsheet that would enable you to plug some things in and calculate it on your own to kind of see how the numbers come together. Jennifer, you may want to add, you may have a little bit better answer than I did there.
So Heather, similar to how we calculate proficiency or now state assessment results in reading and math, there will be points assigned for the various responses. So you can imagine that more points will be for the positively affiliated responses and less points for the more negatively affiliated responses. So there will be a collection and averaging of those responses across the school and district.
Great,
And
thank you so much.
And when we looked at that data from prior years, because people have, the surveys out there, it's public, and we've actually looked at that. We had some opportunity to learn questions that are not considered part of the survey, but gave some information and context. It does differentiate school performance, because again, to be included in accountability federally, every piece has to differentiate lower performing or schools versus higher performing schools. So there's a range of performance on the survey information, just like there is on the reading test or the math test. And in fact, that would be a necessary thing or wouldn't receive federal approval.
Jennifer, you want to take us into fall reporting?
Sure, thank you. And Heather and Jennifer, thanks for those questions as well. So fall reporting is just right around the corner, even though we're in the some summer months. It is the middle of summer and it's going by very quickly. To get to fall reporting, there's multiple steps that have to take place. From the time the assessment completed back in end of May, early June of this year, there's been a lot of activities this summer to develop the score. There's been standard setting for each of the assessments around the new assessments that were administered this spring, as well as range finding for social studies. There's a lot of activities that take place during the summer to prepare for accountability. We've started here with a timeline just around the standard setting and the reporting of accountability timeline. You can see that the first step in this quality control process is what we call a fall data review. Now, Kentucky is different than many other states around reporting and public reporting because we take multiple steps toward quality assurance. Other states, what they do is they get the information from the vendor, put it into a format and put it out for public consumption. Kentucky, we take a little bit more involvement with our districts before public reporting. So we engage with our building level and district level assessment coordinators to review data and provide opportunities for them to provide input and make the data as clean as it possibly can be prior to public reporting. So the first step will be in early August, so just within the next few weeks. We will have all of the assessment data to our schools and districts for review. And during that step, district assessment coordinators will review demographic data, participation data, as well as accountability data. Those demographic data include gender, race, ethnicity, as well as special education status, and so forth. There's many types of student demographic data that are reviewed during that time frame. We'll also review for participation. There were many submissions for a non-participation or exemption from testing this spring due to various reasons, such as being medically exempt for COVID or being exposed to COVID, as well as other medical reasons. There will also be an opportunity to review for accountability. Now, when we say that the student is accountable to a school, that's the student has been in that school for 100 days or more. So accountability reporting is around the student that's been in that school and accountable for that school that has been in the school for 100 days or more. So that fall data review in August is the last chance for our district assessment coordinators to review the data and make individual student changes before it goes public. Then we go into the next section. We want that as clean as possible to go into that standard setting that Rhonda just described. So having that clean data will go into standard setting, and our standard setters from across the state will look at a multitude of data around each of the performance in those indicators. Now they'll have information about schools, but the schools will be de-identified. So there will be school data that will be reviewed so that the standard setters can make informed decisions around each of those indicators. And then the overall accountability system. So that is planned for September 13th and 14th. And then after those standard setters make that recommendation, then the department and the local superintendent advisory council will approve those cuts. It was tentative for September 19th. It is now within the last week or so has been confirmed. So we can take that tentative date off of that because LSAC is planned to meet on September 19th. After September 19th, then we'll have our cuts for each of the indicators as well as the overall accountability system. And what the Office of Assessment and Accountability can then put in place and run the data behind the accountability system. We'll present that information back to district assessment coordinators in a quality control day. So after the LSAC meeting, we'll have our district assessment coordinators come together again across the state. We'll do this virtually online, and they'll have another opportunity to look at the data. This time it will be associated with accountability information. So during that quality control step, our district assessment coordinators look for systemic issues. For example, if they have all of their alternate assessment students in that program included in the system. We want to make sure that the system is running, it's running effectively before we go out to public reporting, and our district assessment coordinators are an important part of that process. And then the final step, if there's any cleanup that needs to take place after that final review during the quality control day, we'll take those and make any adjustments that are needed and put the accountability data out for the public, and that is scheduled for early October. So that's where we're really trying to make that target date for that early to mid-October. And then, of course, there is a Kentucky Board of Education meeting that we're trying to have the information to them as well. So when we talk about reporting, as Rhonda mentioned, all those indicators, those big indicators of state assessment results in reading and math, state assessment results in science, social studies, and writing, quality of school climate and safety, the new English language progress, post-secondary readiness, and graduation rate. So those indicators will have three things. There's going to be an indicator score. So those indicators, they will all have calculations behind those because it starts with the student data and it aggregates up. And there are formulas and calculations behind each of those indicators. And that's what Heather was asking about on the quality of school climate and safety. So there will be numbers behind all of those indicators, and as well as then once we have those, then the standard setters coming together on the 13th and 14th will look individually at each of those indicators and decide what by indicator, by level for elementary, middle, and high, what makes the indicator from very low to very high. So for status, the reporting, descriptive reporting will include the indicator whether the school is very low, low, medium, high, or very high. So there's those 5 levels. Once the standard setters determine those descriptive cut points, then the associated color on those indicators will be associated with that. Blue being the highest and red being the lowest. So by indicator, there'll be a score, description, and color. The next thing for reporting will be then an overall score. So that, or not score, the overall will only be colors. So publicly, there will be colors on a dashboard. And the standard setters, again, will determine and recommend those cut points for that overall. So each of those different indicators that has a score behind it will be combined into an overall score, and those standard setters will cut then what the cut point is for the colors. And again, that's from red to blue, from highest to lowest. The final thing, which you heard Kelly Foster describe this morning, is federal classifications. And for this year, for fall reporting, it's going to be CSI, either 1 or CSI 2, and then TSI. So those will be the indicate based on that overall score as well. So those are the big things for accountability reporting that you can anticipate in the fall. Now, Each of those indicators are brought together by level using that score for the it by indicator times the weight of each of the indicators by level. These weights were determined by the Kentucky Board of Education with guidance from the federal statute, the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. There are requirements within ESSA each state must adhere to. And you can see that from the weights in the different tables. For elementary and middle schools, the greater weight has to be on reading and math, as well as then at the high school, the emphasis has to be on the graduation rate in addition to the reading and math. So you can see that also the English language progress has for elementary and middle schools has to be combined with the reading and math to be the greatest emphasis within the school level. So these weights then will combine with the indicator score to produce that overall score. So these are the colors and the designations for the overall performance from, again, lowest to highest, blue to red. And those federal designations that we talked about earlier with Kelly in those federal definitions. Now, you can anticipate a dashboard that will look very similar to the California model of accountability. The Kentucky's accountability system was highly influenced by the California accountability model, and dashboard approach is in statute. We've taken the approach of dials that display the different colors. Now, this is an example. In Kentucky, we use and partner with a vendor called Bright Bites to develop our school report card. You can anticipate the dashboard will not have the needles in our report card, but actually have like little arrow indicators on the outside of where the school district or state is landing on each of those. So you can this gives you a visual of what a dashboard could look like. But again, in Kentucky, ours will be just a little different. Also in reporting is long-term goals and measures of interim progress. These were developed again back in 2019 when we had the last type of state level full inclusion of assessment and then the reporting of accountability. You can see that from the original intent of the development of the long-term goals was one iteration of students. So when we set those long-term goals in 2019, those were to end in 2030, which was about 12 years or one generation of students. Because of the pandemic, those timelines have been shifted, and now those long-term goals and measures of interim progress are pushed to 2032. So those long-term goals and measures of interim progress are around our academic achievement, our graduation rate, and the progress on English language proficiency. And English language proficiency is our English language learners attaining the English language. Let me pause there because that was a lot of information as well. This is a good kind of breaking point here to see if there are any clarifying questions.
Any questions for Rhonda or Jennifer? Jennifer, on the long-term goals, are those at the school level and district and state level or just at the state level?
Those are school and district level.
Yeah, they're all three levels.
Yes.
So we'll produce them for the state, the district, and
Mhm.
the school. And again, they're a public reporting piece. They're not tied directly to a color And the accountability, though, they don't contribute to the color in any way. But they are expected public reporting for the federal, to meet the federal law.
Okay, if there are no other colors, we'll go on to accountability for 2022, 23 and beyond.
All right. As we talk about this, this slide kind of reminds you of some things that we've already talked about. So I want to highlight the one bullet that is a little bit new. Jennifer just went through, there are 5 levels for status, and she talked about the high to very low. So keep in mind, once we bring change into it, there's 5 levels for change. So as we think a year into the future, to be reporting in the fall of 23, the 22-23 school year, that's that process of adding change into the system. So how did you do in 22 compared to 23? And when we look at change, there will need to be 5 levels that's spelled out in the state law. There'll be 5 levels. So we've described that from increase significantly to decline significantly. So much in the same way we have the 5 levels in status, there will be a companion 5 levels for change. And so then we'll need to put that together in another standard setting round next year, and probably around the same time frame, maybe August, September, somewhere when we get results back in. So let's move to the next slide, and that'll kind of give you just a visual. You've probably seen this before when we talked about accountability in the past. So in essence, this is just showing a potential way to combine change and status. And so again, those color grids kind of again give you the attitude of where might we see a blue reported and a green. And you may remember we went to the state board to kind of talk about how the table should be developed. How should it look in terms of the number of red versus blue, green, yellow, all of those 5 levels of color. So we had some conversation with the state board that yielded this kind of general, I'll call it generic overview table of combining status and change. Obviously, numbers determine when do I leave the first box and go to the box next to it, and then the box next to that. So again, there's numbers behind the system that tell us when we enter one of these number boxes. And the standard setting will help to establish where's the line where we move from the first box to the second box. But the key overall then is bringing those together and using color to do that. And again, that's a year down the road before that would occur. So let me pause there and see if you have any specific questions around that before we kind of conclude with our last section of kind of up current things.
So Rhonda and Jennifer, and I know Kelly's not on anymore, I don't think, but in terms of once the whole system is going, and I don't think we identify CSI again till 2025, will they look at where you land for both status and change, or will they just continue to look at status?
I think it would be the 2 combined, where you land when I think of both my status and my change. Because, if you think about just if we play with this table a little bit, if I am a school that my status, let's say my status was very high in the current year, and I maintained from the prior year, then I'm showing a blue box, like the highest rating. If, for instance, I declined from the prior year, you see I moved to the left and I'm in the green box. So I'm thinking, and Jennifer, you correct me if you don't think this is the case, because I will tell you, I don't think we've had a deep conversation yet about that question. So that's a great question for us to take forward. But in my mind, I think you would find your final position in essence by looking at status and change together. And it's from that overall final piece that the CSI and the TSI would be set. I don't think it can be just on the status. I think unless we got a federal pushback that said that it had to stay on status. I know in California, they've put both measures in.
So right now, we are awaiting the confirmation from USED about our approach for identification of our federal classifications. and they are reviewing it now. We've had multiple questions from them. That plan was a 1-year plan. So that plan was for the 21-22 accountability and reporting. We did that specifically because of the types of change that we're bringing in for next year. We will have to go back to the department with another update to the ESSA state plan. And those type of details will have to be approved from them at that time. So next year at this time, we'll be negotiating with them on those type of details.
And we do know from conversations that California did have a little pushback on including change everywhere. So the federal level may say you can include change for a certain piece, but you may have to show it in a particular way in the reporting. Because I think from the federal level, most states do just status. Or if they do change, they reflect it through individual student growth, which we've had in prior systems. But we know the individual student growth has basically been replaced with a more overall change in your indicator in your overall score.
Other questions? Heather?
Yeah, I have a quick one back to the indicators around graduation rate. Will you explain if districts that had students that have the supplemental year, how does that affect their graduation rate?
They end up in the 5-year cohort, I think is the biggest impact, Heather, because the student, in essence, entered a cohort the first time they were a freshman. And if they took a supplemental year because of the pandemic, they'll be in the 5-year cohort. So you notice our graduation for accountability is 4 and 5-year combined. So they would be averaged in as part of the 5-year cohort versus the 4-year. So it could theoretically make your 4-year rate a little lower because they're not included in it, and they show up in the 5-year. It probably won't have much impact in accountability since we average the two together. But Jennifer, I don't know if there's anything you would add to that, but I think the impact is that they show up in the 5 and not the 4. And, when that got talked about in the legislature, we did mention that there would be a potential graduation impact, but I don't think there were huge numbers of students across the state that ended up choosing the supplemental year.
So they're taken out of that numerator for the configuration for the 4-year. Is that right?
No, they show up in the 4-year as not a completer in the
Okay.
4-year. So they have to stay with their cohort, and we look at the 4-year, but it means then they show up eventually because they took 5 years in the 5-year rate.
Okay, so it could potentially negatively impact some districts.
It could.
Okay, thank you.
It could. Again, it may not be very much because, again, huge numbers of kids haven't chosen to do that.
Sure.
But we did caution that, this is one of the pieces where there's very little ability of states to change how they calculate graduation rate. That's a very defined federal piece. We are allowed to do a 4 and a 5-year and even a 6-year, and you're able to average it and those kind of things. But you really can't move kids out of cohort. You can't change how they show up in the cohort. There are a lot of rules around that piece.
Thank you so much.
A couple of additional points on that, Heather, is that, the Kentucky legislators provided that flexibility, and that was a great opportunity for our students to have another experience and have additional learning. That flexibility does not show up from the federal level in that calculation. Yeah, so as Rhonda mentioned, that is state level flexibility, whereas the definition of graduation rate in that calculation has not changed from the federal level. And that's what Rhonda was trying to say. Also, the other thing is that where the 4-year rate shows up is Kelly identified that CSI2 for our graduation rate. If it falls below 80%, then there is a possibility that this school is identified for CSI2, because obviously that's the definition, but that's the place that has the biggest impact on that 4-year rate. Okay, good questions. Okay, if we don't have any other at this time, let's move on to the assessment blueprint. As Thomas talked about this morning, the science standards are going through the process of revision, and he shared a lot of this information with you this morning because of the statute calls for those, the process of review for the standards. Well, it also includes the process of review for the associated assessment blueprints. So currently, the Kentucky Academic Standards for Science is moving through the process of revision. And as you heard him say that about the advisory panels and review committees and the challenges that they're facing with those, we have entered in to that work with them and are working collaboratively with them to review the blueprint. So we had the opportunity, Rhonda and I did, to talk with the advisory panel for science about the upcoming work on the blueprint. So we got to meet with them and talk with them through the process of reviewing the blueprint that is currently out for review now. And we want to involve the members of that advisory panel this time because they are such the experts with those standards. What we did the previous time when we were going through I want to say it was the science or the reading and math science revision, we had a separate advisory panel review committees that were different from the review of the standards. So we had separate assessment blueprint committees that were reviewing, and what we thought would be beneficial this time is to combine those committees so that the same stakeholders and those same teacher experts and curricular experts in those standards would be reviewing the standards as well as the blueprint, so that they have the in-depth knowledge of the standards and then can review the blueprint as well. So we are currently going through that process. The standards are out for review through the 27th of this month. The blueprint was released on January 1st. It was a Friday, July 1st, Friday, July 1st. The assessment blueprint was released and will be out the entire month of July for public comment. So if you have teachers in your district, please share this with them. If you have community stakeholders that you can share it with, please do, because we are looking for feedback on both those science standards and the blueprint. And they're currently out. The final piece that I wanted to share with you, we have shared the accountability at a glance with you before, as well as the assessment, accountability, and reporting through 2024. Those two resources you have had, we just wanted to link them here for you. The new resource we have developed this summer is all of those activities that are planned for the around the assessment as well as the accountability that all get us to public reporting. So many activities through both the public reporting of assessment data and release to the districts of assessment data, as well as then the accountability. We've put a lot of emphasis in those and develop those timelines. So you can see that and see the amount of efforts that our stakeholders put into developing the standards and setting the standards, because each of the activities that we are involved with involve our stakeholders, our teachers within the districts, and they are working tremendously, providing such good engaging discussion this summer. I can't tell you enough about the professionalism our teachers are bringing to those processes, and we really appreciate that. They know the importance of the work that they're doing within those standard setting committees, and I just really appreciate the work that they are putting in. And then a lot of the assessment work has been completed in June and July around the alternate Kentucky Summative Assessment. We're preparing for next week, the week of July 25th, to bring teachers in to set standards around the content areas for the Kentucky Summative Assessment. And there's a lot of good work happening next week around the standard setting on the assessments for those levels of novice, apprentice, proficient, distinguished. So lots of good work happening, and resource for our SCAAC members to understand that process and those committees. So let me stop there, and also note for you that there will be other back to school trainings for us that we will release that around all of our accountability standards and indicators. So these back to school trainings will have in-depth information around each of the indicators. So if you are wondering how each of these indicators are calculated, what the base information is, and the fundamental information, you will have those in our back to school trainings. Those are scheduled to be released on Monday, August 1st. That's our target deadline for release of those back to school trainings, and as well as around the assessments of KSA and the alternate KSA, alternate access and access, as well as K-Screen. We'll have one for K-Screen too. So lots of good work happening this summer, lots of good resources, both out and upcoming. So now, yes, let me pause.
Okay, we're not hearing any questions. Those resource documents are very useful, so I would encourage you to print those off. Remember, you can find all this information in your SCAAC folder, your Google Drive folder. And so if you're thinking to yourself, where was that? You can go back and find it. So the last thing we want to do is take a moment, and I want to share with you the dates for our upcoming SCAAC meetings. These are for the 2023 school year, and these are tentative right now, but we want you to look at these: March 21st, July 18th, September 19th, and November 21st. And let us kind of take a quick look at these dates in the next couple weeks and check your calendars. We've had good attendance for our summer July meeting, and we hope to have good attendance for everything else. So I'm going to conclude by announcing that our next meeting will be September 20th, and you won't want to miss it. It's an exciting time for assessment and accountability in Kentucky. The SCAAC meeting will have been the day before, and so it will be a meeting with some updates on everything we heard today. Before I ask for an adjournment, are there any questions from the group?
Beth, just if people have some thoughts of things that would be more helpful for them, they always, just like you've said before, you can reach out to us. You have our contact information. So if there's anything at all that you think might be helpful to have a little more detail or information on, we'll be happy to try to work on the generation of that. Thank you.
You can reach out directly to anybody who presented today, but also remember that Melissa Chandler is now our point person. And so she'll be great. There's Melissa. Thanks for waving. And with that, I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll motion.
I have a motion from Heather. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, and we have a second. So with that, all in favor, raise their hand and wave goodbye. All opposed, same sign. We will see everybody in September. Thank you again for your attentiveness this morning.
Thank you all.